I have Moira Geoffrion. I love that name because I can't say it. Where does that come from, by the way?
The Moira is Irish,
Uh-huh.
and my father was a philosopher, and it's Greek for fate.
Fate.
So
And your father was from
Switzerland,
right?
Yeah, he was born in the late 1800s. And when I met Charles, I told him that
Charles is your husband,
yes,
for those who might not know.
he was destined to meet me because I was his fate.
Uh,
And Geoffrion is French. It's Geoffrion, really.
So Moira is an artist. You're my artist here, and I love your work, and really variety of things that you do. But you know, I think of you as an artist, but really you have a lot of history with art from an academic standpoint.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you grew up in where did you exactly grow up?
I was born
Ohio?
in Maryland, but when I was 2, my parents moved to a farm in southeastern Ohio.
In Ohio.
And he had been a university professor, and she was a concert pianist.
Your father. Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And they decided they wanted to go into nature and survive, and we did. We had
So she was a
performing concert pianist.
and she went to
Washington.
Ohio, where they completely changed everything.
Marietta College was a small college there, and they wanted my father to be head of philosophy.
Mm.
And so they bought a farm with 136 acres, and we survived on everything we grew.
No way.
And we all had to learn. We all had to work.
And that was you had other brothers and sisters?
Yeah, there were 6 of us.
Oh, wow.
One boy and the rest girls. Poor guy was right in the middle. So it was interesting because we just had a work ethic. You had to work 2 hours before breakfast, and you had to work when you got back. And
On the farm?
On the farm, yeah.
Yeah, literally on the
we
farm.
We produced everything. We even made cheese, and we all learned how to cook and so on,
And
carpentry.
Did your mom make you play instruments, being a concert?
She wrote a book that was titled "How to Teach Children Music." You can teach anyone music, something like that. And 6 of us were born tone deaf, and I was one of those. So my oldest sister was the one who really could sing and play the piano. And she'd be cooking in the evening, and she'd be going, "No, F flat," and I'm practicing. I say, "Which one?"
And you would play piano.
Piano.
And your mom was she a pianist?
She was a concert pianist.
Oh,
yeah.
wow. So did you have music growing up all the time in your home?
All the time, yeah. In fact, when I met, my father was crazy about opera, and I was the only one who, I used to be very quiet. You wouldn't believe that, and sit still.
No, I don't.
And so
Something happened.
I would sit with him, and we would read art history books together, and he would listen to opera with me and tell me about the opera and show me the pictures in the books. And of course, costume became very interesting to me, and that combined with art history.
And so that started very early.
As early as I can remember.
And you would actually talk and read art with your father, who was a philosopher.
Yeah. And since he was Swiss, he spoke a lot of languages. So we each spoke 5 languages.
Wow.
And grew up learning. He only spoke German at home.
Right.
And my mother only spoke French because she'd studied at the Dalcroze Institute in Switzerland. And then we learned our English mostly from the hired hands. So we had definite Midwestern accents and so on.
Right. I can hear that.
Yeah.
And did any of your other siblings have that interest in art?
Well, everyone in our family collects art.
Yes. Oh, okay.
Is really interested in art. And my twin sister and her husband especially.
Identical twin sister?
No, she's a fraternal. She's taller than me, and she's a flaming redhead.
Okay.
She's an actress.
Oh, didn't know that.
And a Russian scholar. And she never seemed to study and got straight A's, and I had to really work hard.
But everyone in the family, all the siblings, collected art. And do you put that, account that to your family collecting?
Being surrounded by art
and
learning about it. In the school that my parents started in Ohio, because you couldn't home teach people.
Right.
And the local school in the village was really bad. And they believed in corporal punishment, so wasn't comfortable being there. So they started a school, and they actually had students enrolled from big cities, and it was a lot of kids who were from very well-off families who the kids were problem kids.
Right.
And they shaped them up. And we had really fond memories of that. So we had, when I started, there were about 15 students, but the largest it ever got to be was 150.
In your dad's school?
Yeah.
And it was
and we had
it was considered to be it must have been one of the first schools like that, right?
it was college prep.
Uh-huh.
Every student who graduated got into their college of choice. Anyone who needed money got scholarships.
Wow, wonderful.
We had
Is
anywhere.
that school still there?
It's now called the what is it called? Dayton Country Day School, and they still are in operation. A bit different, but a lot of arts in the school. My father taught art classes. He was actually a really good artist.
So that's that art connection. Then,
And
yeah.
his degree, he had a degree in engineering and a degree in philosophy. And so he taught a lot of the language classes that my mother didn't teach. He taught the biology classes, and then we had other teachers. And I did have an art teacher for 2 years, an actual artist teaching. But my dad just kept encouraging me, and
And were you making art at that time too?
as long as I can remember.
You were making art.
And
What kind of things were you making at that time?
When I couldn't do as well with my writing, I illustrated my papers really wonderfully, so I did very well grade-wise.
And were you doing what kind of art? I know you ultimately
Mostly
sculpture.
from the natural environment.
Yeah,
So it was
okay.
mostly drawing and painting.
I see.
In fact, I hadn't done any sculpture until I went to Africa in the Peace Corps.
Mm-hmm.
And the lighting was like here in Arizona, and everything was so sculptural. It was so 3D.
Mm-hmm.
And so then I started pulling clay out of the riverbed and working it and making forms.
And
then,
so you go early to college. You go at 16, right?
Yeah.
And you get your BFA,
Yeah.
and that was in Boston.
Yeah, at Boston University
And
School
how did
of
that?
Fine Arts.
How did that? So you went to an academic school in fine arts.
Yeah.
How did that change the way you saw things comparatively? Because basically you're in an art school with your dad, and to some extent.
Right. Well, and I hadn't really had art teachers, so one of the interesting things when I showed my portfolio, because I needed a scholarship, we all had to get
Right.
scholarships, and I thought I'm never going to get in. I haven't taken art classes with all these people, and so I showed my portfolio, and the head of the entrance program, he was the primary teacher that we would have the first year. He said, "You're in," and he said, "This is great," and I said, "It's great? How?" And he said, "I don't have to unteach anything." He said, "You're exactly what you are."
Yeah.
And that program was very much like the farm. I mean, you had to hand in 20 minimum drawing pads filled every semester.
Huh.
At the university here, at the U of A, where I was head of the department, faculty maybe get the students to fill 2 books.
Wow.
So we were just drawing all the time.
You were going all the time.
All the time. So it was eat, breathe, think, sleep.
And do you think, I'm always curious because I've heard individuals, artists actually say is be careful when you go to art school, it may really screw you up. Do you find that, is that a possibility that you
I think it
did for
depends
Dixon,
on
I mean.
who the faculty are, really,
Yeah.
and what the program's like. Because if one has a certain direction that you're moving in, some schools can really screw you up. There are many faculty who teach because it's an income, and they're not as dedicated to the growth of the individual direction of the student. I hate to say that, but I've run into a lot. And then they want you to be like them. It's like they're groupies, and that can really screw up gifted students who are raw and really, really good, really talented. The Boston University at that time, figuration was in. It was really, I went to Rauschenberg's first show in New York. I went to all of these guys, and we saw Jackson Pollock and you can name all of them.
So when you
And
saw...
but that was very new, and most of the schools then were all, other than the Hans Hofmann program in New York, were all figuration, and we knew the figure like a medical student does. We knew all the terms, we knew all the muscles, we knew the veins, we knew everything. I never could quite figure out what that was about, but
So you go to this show, Rauschenberg show in New York as a student, right? You're somewhere in college at that time, probably under 20, right?
Well, I was a junior at Boston University.
So you're 19 because you started at 16. How did that affect you, seeing that, or did it?
One of our professors, Walter Murch, who was from New York, he was amazing, and he took us, the junior class, he said, any of you that want to come down, we're going to go around to shows. It was an opening weekend. And so a bunch of us went down together, and we walked around the galleries. We get to the Rauschenberg show. Well, his texture and his color was amazing. So there were things we could really react to. But at the same time, we're looking at like, wow, this is really weird stuff.
Right, so
and
different
one of
than
my
figurative.
classmates said to me, I can't imagine anyone paying $500 for this quilt that's got paint on it.
Yeah.
and then one of the other colleagues said, what the heck are these brushes glued on the side of his canvases?
Right.
$500. We didn't have that kind of money
No.
then, but if we'd pulled our money.
And at that point, did you find it interesting or just kind of odd and didn't really see?
I found it really interesting, but I think part of it was the breadth of background I already had. I had a much stronger background in art history, in the history, how art forms move from one period to another. I mean, these guys were like the front edge. And I remember my father talking about Hodler, who's a very famous Swiss artist.
Right.
You'd love his landscapes. To us, they look beautiful, maybe tame, but really well executed. And they weren't as realistic as other people's were. And even the portraits he did and so on. He loved him, and he said to all of us, the engineering students and the medical students and all of the students in Switzerland, because art in many European households is just assumed. It's part of it.
Part of the curriculum of being a home.
And I had a theory why it isn't in the United States. But anyway, so he would say, if you saw this guy's work next to his peers' work, you'd think he was crazy. And he was their idol. And I remember him telling me that. And
so you
that
hear
sort
your
of
dad's voice in your head
and
when you're
I'm
looking at
this
Rauschenberg.
Work and thinking like, well, there's some really interesting things going on here.
And what year would have that been?
Oh, gee, let's see. 63.
Yeah, so it's really early.
Really early, yeah.
And you said you saw
maybe 63,
Pollock's
64.
work too.
There was a big show of his work, And
what do you think of
Krasner and all of those guys. Well, you know, as people would say, oh, I could do that too.
Right, yeah, right. Well, then
So
no
you
one
study
really
enough
knew.
about-
I mean, he had been on Life magazine at
Right,
that time, but I'm not sure he was really.
But a lot of those people, and there were very few women artists.
Yeah.
We saw Krasner's work. With the women we saw because they were affiliated with the right people. Or like Marisol Escobar, I freaked out about her work. I just fell in love with it. It was a combination of the abstraction and figuration
and you could relate to it from the figurative
and
part.
these were, these were real people she knew. And what I found out later in doing some research was that, the hat on one of the pieces with a hat of a lover, so she did a portrait of him, that kind of thing. But she was just very well connected from the beginning. So there were the people who came from well-off families and were already connected to the art scene, or the people who were married to the men. But there were very few women. George O'Keeffe was another one.
And were you cognizant of O'Keeffe at that time?
By the time I was a
20s?
senior,
Yeah.
I knew about her work. At that time, because we were so technically trained, I thought it was really poor drawing.
Yeah. Because it was so loose in a way.
Yeah, it was so loose.
Yeah. And when did that ever flip?
And at the same time, when one thinks of the beginning minimalist and all that in the colors, and I like that work because Alber's work, I was just blown away because it was all about color relationships, and I could finally understand the color theory from the color theory classes we had were like chemistry classes. We made our own paint. It's amazing how many brain cells left,
Yeah.
No gloves, no masks.
No masks. Yeah, it was a different world
Lead
for
white.
sure. Lots of aeration.
Yeah.
So you get your BFA in Boston, and then you go from there to Indiana?
No, well,
or did you do Peace Corps at that time?
We had applied to graduate schools. At that time, I was engaged, and we got married 2 months after we graduated.
This is your
At
Charles, who's still your husband.
His field was political science, although he was a jazz musician. And in fact, I didn't know anything about jazz until I met him. And all the music, classical music backwards and forwards, because that's what my parents were into.
Was that why you were drawn to him, because of his music background, you think?
Oh, no, it was other stuff.
Yeah, okay, never mind. Good-looking guy. Okay, we don't have to go down that road.
It was kind of funny because I'm thinking of some of the stories that you and Kathleen tell about meeting. And I was at a party, and I was sitting on the distant side of the room, and this gentleman walks in the door, and I looked at him. Now, this was at the beginning of the Vietnam War now. And I looked at him, and I thought he must be returning from being in the service.
This is like 64,
because
maybe?
he has a receding hairline.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, and he certainly looks older, but man,
Right.
I got to figure out how to meet him. And I'm telling my friend this, and suddenly standing next to me, there he is. And he said he looked across the room and he saw me and he figured I was a freshman.
Yeah.
Because I got carded till I was 30.
Right.
And he said he just decided, oh, got to meet her.
Yeah.
And he just walked across and introduced himself, and that was it.
And were you guys married before you graduated college?
No.
Right.
Charles' parents and my parents basically said, if you get married before college, you pay the rest of your way.
Right. Right. So you waited till then.
So
and then you
waited.
both ended up going to the Peace Corps, right?
Well, then we decided to apply in the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
What John Kennedy was just this guru to us.
Yeah.
Amazing. And they'd started the Peace Corps and
This was
everything.
like 63, 64?
Well, late 63 we applied. We went in 64
Yeah.
as soon as we graduated.
Right.
And he was just an idol and everything he was doing. And we were really excited about it. And of course, at that time, our parents were like, "Oh my God, you're going to Africa? This
Right.
is just really scary."
And you went to West Africa, right?
Sierra Leone,
Yeah.
which you couldn't go now.
Because
we
it's
were
just too dangerous?
very dangerous. We were there for 2 years, and the year after we left, cholera came through and wiped out over half the village we were in, and that whole area. And then, of course, the Ebola came through later. And before that, between that time, the Sierra Leone was really rich in diamonds, not in the area where we lived, but the south eastern area. And so there was a lot of fighting that started going on. Different tribes came in from other countries. There were the Blood Diamond Wars.
Right.
They were getting kids drugged up and then making them go into villages and shoot all their families and people. And then
This was after you left?
Yeah, after we left. So, and then people were being kidnapped and so on
Right.
and so forth.
And so you were in your early 20s at this point.
Yeah.
And so how did that 2 years in West Africa affect you as an artist? Can you pinpoint what it did to you or how it changed you?
I became much more interested in terms of painting, in documenting different cultural aspects of the area, of deprivation, of the richness of the area, all of that. Color, my color started popping a lot. And then I really wanted to do sculpture, and I just started making sculptures. And I look back on them; they're kind of neat but funky, clunky figures. I knew enough about the figure that I just couldn't. I had river clay, and it was falling apart.
And was that sculpture because of the sculpture you're actually seeing of the African sculpture? Because I mean,
actually,
was for
my
Picasso,
pieces were
right?
more elongated, and we were the first night we were in the village. And in this house, that the chief's first wife, he had 24 wives, and his big wife, as they called her, had this house brand new, and so they were renting to the Peace Corps for us. And there was no latrine. Well, they built the latrine, but there was a big hole.
Yeah.
And there was this little guy following Charles the whole time, looking at him, and I'm thinking, like, this is really weird. Everybody's staring at you, and they're rubbing his arms because he has hair on his arms.
Yeah.
And the guy tells somebody something to do, and he's speaking too fast, so we don't quite understand yet. And this kid runs off, and he comes back with a crate, and the carpenter, he pulls out his saw, and he cuts a hole in it. And they put it there. It fit Charles perfectly.
Yeah.
Didn't fit me. I had to hold on.
This was your latrine?
But, yeah. And then clearly I wasn't endowed enough because one of the elder women was standing next to me. She's looking at me, and everybody's talking, and she's looking at me, and finally she just reached in and grabbed, and then she goes, "Oh yeah, she's a woman."
Because they weren't sure.
Because I wasn't big enough.
Yeah,
I guess.
That's funny. Now, so you lived with them for 2 years, and what are you doing at that time? What's your job?
Our job was to do nutrition training and agricultural work.
And how did you knew it from being working your own farm?
I had gone on a
how
farm. Charles grew up in the city, but all the agricultural work that was being done had to be through the guy.
So did they give you some kind of training?
No,
you're in art
didn't.
history.
No. Well, in the Peace Corps training at Hampton Institute, Virginia, they took all the guys to pig farms and to slaughterhouses to see how they're slaughtered and butchered, and that had nothing to do. Oh, and they did grafting of trees that are in temperate. It was nothing really trained for. We were in great physical shape. They had the coach in charge of our training.
Yeah.
And we were exhausted all the time.
Right.
But so we got there, and there was a Chinese from Taiwan agricultural farm there in that village, and they didn't know any Timni, the local language, which we did, and they didn't know any English. And so we traded teaching them Timni and English
for knowledge,
giving us vegetables and so on. And they would, every week, they would bring us 2 headpans full of rice and all these vegetables. They had a great garden. And those gardens were all over Africa to keep them in the United Nations, to keep the vote. And so we did that, but most of the food went in our front door and out the back door. So I started feeding programs because it was far more than we can eat. And so that agricultural work went, so they gave us types of rice that were much higher yield than what the Africans had. And so I would read all the directions, and I would talk to Charles about planting things and how far down you do this stuff and so on and so forth. Some of it was guesstimating from experience, and then he would go out and teach the people how to plant that particular variety. And they were disease-resistant seeds and so on. So that helped them.
And you could see a difference at the end of 2 years, what you guys had done?
Yeah, we did a lot, but then we left, and then it's all over with.
Yeah, it's gone.
And they didn't replace us in the village. And then, as I said, cholera came through. We made our own boat to go up and down. We were on the Little Scarces River, which is one of the biggest rivers in Sierra Leone that was 30 miles from the ocean. So we made a boat so we can go up and down river to do agricultural work all along the river.
Wow.
And Charles had taught watercraft safety in the Boston Harbor, and lived on water, sailed and all that. So he knew the shape of boats. So I would do sketching, and he'd tell me what the shape should be for a dinghy and what the proportions were. And then since I did dressmaking to pay my way through college, I made patterns. And then we got the local carpenter, and he hand sawed the wood, and we made this boat. It was quite heavy, floated well. It was a little more pointy than it should be, so we had to put some heavy materials in the front bow to keep it down in the water, because it would just, you'd have like 3 feet in the water when it was going fast. And Peace Corps gave us a motor. And so we did a lot of agricultural and medical work up and down the river, which was really cool. And the river had crocodiles and hippopotamuses in it, so you had to be careful.
Yeah. What happened when people had injuries? Did they bring them to you?
Oh, yeah.
And you don't have any medical training.
No, but it was common sense. We did have a lot of medical supplies, and there was an Italian doctor with the Catholic mission who came through once a month, and so he trained us in some stuff, and then we took care of people for him, and he talked about different medications.
So you were just absorbing
people
everything.
Would be just cut open, And one guy was climbing in a tree to get some coconuts, and there were some monkeys, and he wanted to kill the monkeys, so he asked his friend to hand his gun up, which was an old Dane gun, and it's full of nails and shrapnel and all that stuff. And the guy accidentally pulled the trigger, so we had to clean that up.
Yeah.
A lot of, anytime somebody would get a small prick, flies would get on it, and then they get these huge sores.
Yeah.
So we dealt with a lot of things like that. And there was a hospital 30 miles away that we would often send people to.
Now, were you able to still create?
Oh, yeah.
And you were making art while you were there?
Yeah, I was doing a lot of drawing from the villagers. Oh, my gosh.
Yeah.
Terrific models. The little kids, too, they were great.
Yeah, so that never left your back in your mind.
I
and you knew this was just a short term, I'm going to help my country, I'm going to do my Peace Corps for JFK.
We got more out of it. In a way, we got more out of it than they did, because once we were gone, there were things that couldn't be continued. And you needed the connection with AID and all the other groups to get the supplies up there. So,
and so that's 40 years ago. What was your takeaway from all that? How has that affected you throughout your life?
It totally changed our lives.
Yeah, because you saw the world differently?
Yeah, totally differently. We came back as hippie demonstrators.
Yeah, right.
And very interested in community.
Right.
I don't know that we would have been as interested in community. I have no way of knowing that.
Never did a commune? Many people thought about it or did
No,
it
we didn't.
At your age group?
We didn't really, we weren't into that as much. We had a lot of friends who really wanted us to do communes, and, everybody would share everything, and we just weren't into that.
That was like 60s, late 60s?
Yeah. And when we came back, all of the people who were our close friends we didn't have anything in common.
Yeah. You'd
we
seen the
got
world.
home, and the World Series was on. And, our friend said, come over, you can see everybody that was in the wedding and all the friends. And we went over, and there were about 30 people there. And they opened it and said, come in, grab a beer, and let's watch the game. And nobody asked us anything about the Peace Corps.
Yeah.
And we're like, this is really weird.
Yeah. And so you get back from the Peace Corps, and then not long after that, you go.
We go directly to Bloomington.
And that's where you get your MFA in sculpture.
Right.
And how did that occur? Why sculpture?
Well, I knew that I really wanted to make sculpture, but I didn't have any sculptures. So I applied in painting. And William Bailey was my teacher, and James McGarrell, two of the biggest people at the time. And then they had two sculptors there who were okay. They weren't as nationally known as the painters, and they were very chauvinistic.
That's a problem that you probably had to deal with throughout your career, right?
Yeah. And at undergraduate school, I didn't have any women teachers. The only woman teacher I had was an English teacher, and she was a really old lady, probably my age, probably younger than me.
Yeah.
And she was very strict, and since I had terrible allergies, she kept kicking me out of class because I was disrupting her class. And I went to the student health center. I got to have something because we can only have 3 passes.
Right.
And you flunk. And so the doctor says, here, take this, take a sip every time you start feeling wheezy, and I'm sure it's something that's no longer on the market.
Right.
And so I slept through the rest of the classes. And I had a B plus average, and she flunked me.
Oh, my God.
So
your only woman teacher.
Yeah. And then, anyway, but then in graduate school, I only had male teachers in the studio classes. And in most of my classes, I was the only woman student in sculpture.
Which is kind of a man-dominated field, I guess.
So we were in Bloomington to begin with, and I just took every sculpture class I could take that first semester, and then went to the 2 guys, and I made sure I was over there all the time working in the studio. And I did all my painting, again, having grown up on a farm and that kind of work ethic, it all seemed normal and easy to me. And the rest of my friends were out partying, and I was working. So they accepted me into the program, so I got my I started the graduate degree there, but then Charles had a job offer. He finished his dissertation research. He got a grant to go back to Africa, and I certainly wasn't going to stay home if he was going back to Africa.
Right.
And he was doing his research in Malawi, which is very much like here. It was high mountain ranges and plateaus and long open, veldt. And so we went back there, and at that time we had Sabrina, so she was 14 months. And we spent a year and a half in Malawi on a really good research grant.
And had you gotten your MFA at that time?
I hadn't finished it.
Yeah.
And so then I was a year shy of getting the MFA, and so then Charles, he got a job offer at Southern Illinois University in Edwardsville, and so I applied to that program right away, got in, and when I applied, I said to them, I'd like to come to the program as long as I can get done in a year, and they agreed. So that's where I actually got the official master's from.
And then from there, you end up not long after that in Notre Dame, right?
Right. As soon as I graduated.
Right.
It was funny because I had never intended to teach in university. I just wanted to work in the studio and show in galleries.
That was your real dream, to be an artist.
Yeah, and just, I was already showing anyway.
Yes.
And so I think that's one of the reasons it was easy for me to get a job, because I already had a bigger resume than a lot of colleagues did. But we did a bronze pour, and there was a bar 2 blocks away, and we'd always go there and rehydrate. So we're sitting there, and I'm still getting carded then. I'm sitting next to an 18-year-old, and I get carded, and he doesn't,
Yeah, and you have a kid at that point, too?
Yeah, at that point I have a kid. And so anyway, we're in the bar, and everybody says, well, the job market, the meetings are in Detroit this year, and I'm sure you're all going to the College Art Association meetings. And I'm listening. I hadn't even looked into it.
Right.
And the professor turns, well, Moira doesn't have to, she won't be going because she's a kept woman. She's taken care of. I got really ticked.
Yeah, I'm sure.
And I went home, and I'm like, Charles, yelling. And he says, well, you're going to go, aren't you? And I said, I certainly am. And one of my best friends had gotten his art history degree at IU Bloomington with Roy Sieber, and he was in charge of the African collection at the museum in Detroit. So Charles says, well, you can just go and hang out with him if you don't like the meeting. So I went, and I got 5 job offers, and all my classmates got none. So
and why do you think that was? Because you're probably competing with, it's still, as a female, you're probably having to
there
go
were 2
against
reasons.
those
One,
things too, right?
my art history background was really strong. It was obvious. Most of those programs wanted someone who could teach in their field, sculpture, but they also wanted someone who could teach art history classes,
Right,
or
101.
drawing classes,
Right.
or other areas,
So you were
which I could
well-rounded.
teach. But also, this was now the point in 70, the early 70s, 73, 74, that they realized they better change their quota, and they're looking for women and people of color.
Yeah.
And so there were 4 of the places, I won't mention the names. I went and they said, great, let's show you got the job. Let's show you. I mean, they didn't even talk to me. They brought me, they wined and dined me. They didn't ask me any serious questions. And they said, let's show you where your office is in the classroom. And I'm going like, well, don't you want to know what's up here?
Right.
And Notre Dame gave me a really good interview.
Yes.
And I was.
They cared.
They cared. And I mean, they were asking a lot of questions because I'm a woman again, too. So now this is kind of loosening up the scene a little bit. They had a woman art historian who was an adjunct, but no one tenure track. And I was also 7 months pregnant and, kind of really sticking out there.
Right.
But small for most women. I ate very organically and didn't get as big as everybody else. But I figured it was the only place I could actually go for by that time, because the others I'd gone to the other locations earlier.
Right.
And I decided that they couldn't not hire me because of that, being a Catholic institution.
That's funny.
So, and they hired me.
Uh-huh.
So it was very interesting, and they were very supportive, and it didn't feel uncomfortable being the only woman for a long time.
You were there for a long time, right?
13 years, yeah. But I
And
think
actually, at the end, you were the department
they had
head
just
of the
made
art.
me. They had just made me the department head when the U of A came after me. And when they came after me, the first call I got, they said, are you going to college art meetings? And I said, who is this? Well, we'd like to interview you at College Art. I said, who are you? And they tell me. And I said, well, I'm not looking for a job. I got a great job.
Right.
I'm about to be department head here. My husband is running this great institute, and I don't need to move. And they kept calling me and kept bugging me, and finally.
So was it that persistence that made you want to come here because they really wanted you?
Well, it made me want to just get them off my back.
Yeah.
And finally, I just said, if you guys will stop calling me, I'll come for an interview. But you need to know, I don't want a job.
Right.
And I said, furthermore, if I come there, I'm not coming there unless my husband has a job. We're 5 minutes from work,
Right.
It's easy.
And is this what year this is in the 80s?
So we came here in the last 2 days of December '85.
In 85.
And so we started January of '86.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody told us it's not going to rain. It doesn't rain until.
Right, monsoons.
And the first day of work was such a torrential downpour, we couldn't get out of the house for an hour because we couldn't find our umbrellas. Everything's still in boxes.
Yeah.
And I'm like, doesn't rain, huh?
And so you actually are the department head.
Came as department.
As department head
Yeah.
at the University of Arizona Art Department.
Yeah. And I agreed to do it when I came for the interview, it was interesting because they set everything up, and students and faculty and everybody's there. And I knew that, it was the same thing at Notre Dame. They, when I got the job, the interview offer at Notre Dame, I called Dr. Sieber, who was the great African art historian, and I said, Roy, I've got this interview at Notre Dame. And he said, so are you the first or the last interviewee? I said, I'm the first. He said, then they want you. He said, if you're the first one, they bring the best one in, and then if they like you, they don't bring anyone else in.
Oh, interesting.
Which just saves money.
Yeah.
So, but here at the U of A, when I came, I said, well, I don't see a slide projector here. And they said, oh, we don't have one set up. I said, well, if you're not going to look at my art, I'm not interested in the job. And I said, I'm an artist, and if you don't respect me and don't respect the work, then you don't want me.
Right. Wow.
So they hustle, and they got the slide projector and everything, and I did a slideshow. And then I was very impressed with the graduate program. I had 3 hours with the graduate students. It was fabulous. And a lot of the faculty were powerhouse people. Luis Jimenez was there, Cole Scott, people.
So
like
they
that.
were. You
Bruce
really
McGrew.
you respected the fact that they were good artists.
Oh yeah,
that were shown.
Yeah, and
More than anything,
really
really.
diverse too.
Yeah.
I mean,
And you knew Luis Jimenez then, obviously.
well, I knew of him.
Yeah.
I didn't know him.
But I mean,
before that.
after you came, you.
Oh yeah.
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 What kind of a guy
I was
was
a
he?
mentor for his daughter.
Yeah. Tell me
when she
about him,
came.
because he's a very interesting sculptor, important guy.
Oh, he was really talented. I
Yeah.
mean, he was a great teacher, and the students I talked to about him just raved about him. He, like Cole Scott, was not. A lot of the faculty didn't like them because they were so well known and did so well selling their art. I'm sure that was part of it. And a lot of those faculty retired, and
Right.
some of
But
them
he was
passed
a
away.
well-respected artist
But
and a teacher.
well-respected and
Yeah.
a teacher. And he, sometimes he was late. He was coming from New Mexico. They
Right.
didn't like that. They thought he should be here all the time. So, they probably were treated a little differently in that sense. Cole Scott had, really good students. He had them out to his studio a
Right.
lot. And so did Luis, would hang out with them downtown and so on. So they were a real taste of the international art scene for these students in that sense. And when I came to the university, I had a Guthrie Fellowship that I just received to go to this residency in Scotland. And so I called them up and I said, look, I just got this job and I'd like it if we could delay it for a year and I could get a sabbatical or
Right.
something like that.
Right.
And then we can't do that. So I said to them, well, can I recommend someone to take it in my place?
Yeah.
And this was late enough that, they couldn't do a new search.
Right.
So actually, Bailey Dugan, I recommended her, and she got the Guthrie Fellowship and went to Scotland. She said she was cold all the time because she lives in Arizona for so long.
Right.
But it really was kind of a stepping stone for her. It really made a lot of difference in her career, which was kind of fun. And then,
That's interesting.
I got so busy. I was doing 90 hours a week. I figured if I'm going to do this job, I'm going to do it really well. I'm going to make things happen. We raised, millions of dollars. We set up the advisory board. We instituted new programming. We got the graduate studios. I mean, there was a whole bunch of things that.
And so when you're doing that, you're running an department, but that's your real love is still painting or sculpting.
Yeah,
or
well,
both.
both. And I was really into sculpture then. I was showing in Chicago with the Sonia Zaks Gallery, and she sold out every show, which meant you're like a factory making art all year.
Right.
And most galleries like Lerner Heller in New York, you couldn't show more than once every 2 years, and maybe not even that. It depended how many artists were in the stable.
Sure.
With Sonia, she had 40 artists, and when I first went with her, she said, and that was in April, I went to 4 galleries in Chicago, decided I was ready. I had a whole package, and showed her my work, and she said, well, I'll take you, but you have to understand I have 40 artists, so I can't give you a show. But she was such a prominent gallery and highly regarded dealer, and such an honest person. And then I went to her ex-partner, Marianne Dezen, wanted me. And then I was offered Van Stratton Gallery, was a works on paper gallery. And then there was another brand new small gallery. So there were 4 galleries that wanted me, and 2 of them said they'd give me shows, but they didn't show the whole diversity of the work. They wouldn't show sculpture and painting and prints.
Right.
Or works on paper, or I just didn't trust the person. And one of them went out of business before I would have gotten the show. Actually, it was a brand new gallery, and they just didn't have their act together.
Right.
But Sonia took me, and she said, bring me 7 pieces. She sold them within 2 weeks.
And was this figurative work?
No, it was abstract. It was
really?
It was work that was based. It was based on. I was doing a lot of woodwork, and it was the work, very minimal wood forms at that point, which they began to get more and more organic and more figurative later on. But they were wooden frames with these wooden arcs, and then a lot of handmade paper forms. And I had run the paper making studio at Notre Dame, had raised the money for it and built a paper making studio. So I taught sculptural paper making and fine art paper making. And so a lot of these pieces had huge segments of paper. And she was just selling the drawings like hotcakes. That's what she started with.
Mm.
And she kept calling me and saying, bring me some more, bring me some more. And then she called me up in the last week of July and said, I'm giving you the September show. Well, I totally freaked out. But you have to have sculpture in it, she said.
Right, right.
Because my
by the way,
my
we need
drawings
sculpture.
were sculptural ideas.
Right.
And so, I killed myself off and did that show.
And how was that? How was
it
that
was
show?
great. Well, I went in to deliver the work, and she had 2 collectors waiting to help me unpack, and I thought, this is really weird.
Yeah, they wanted to be first crack at it.
And anyway, and they're looking and so on. They slowed me down, and I had to get back home. I had to get the train, because I took the train in and train back. We had delivered the work the week before. It's the little train that could, it was a 2-car train that went from Chicago to South Bend. And so I jumped on the train, and by the time I got home, the phone was ringing, and Sonia says, I just sold 3 of the pieces to those people who helped
Can you
unpack.
get me more, right?
And she says, you better bring some more with you when you come on Friday. I'm going to leave them up, but I want to have more in the back room.
Right.
So I get there on Friday, and I walk in, there are red dots on everything.
Yeah.
And she did that with it. So then she gave me a show the next year and the next year, and she kept doing that and just selling out.
Now, did you think at that time, you go, okay, maybe I should go this direction and not be teaching, not be in that area, but really just focus on my art?
I would have liked to do that, but teaching was a real hoot. I loved it, and I've always found that the students keep you young intellectually.
Do you think it hurt your art career, though, by not doing that?
Yeah.
Because
sure.
you have somebody that's giving one-man shows, very important gallerist, and they're selling everything out.
Galleries in Washington. I was with the Van Stratton Gallery. I was with Carson and Shapiro in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
Carson and Shapiro in Denver, well, I was with them for a while, and then there were some circumstances.
I can tell there's a story.
Right, which is quite a story. Anyway, but
and you don't want to go into it?
It didn't have to do with anything I did or my work. They were selling it really well, and because they were selling mine well, they took more of her artists. So it helped a bunch of us. But then I was showing with Lerner Heller in New York and Pleiades in New York, and just a lot of different galleries.
And did that continue throughout? Because
oh yeah, I was still showing when I was here at the U of A with these galleries, and in fact, I had a solo show at Sonia Zach's 6 months after I got here, and by that time I was casting and running a foundry. So I got the foundry
here.
The foundry here wasn't in very good shape. It was an accident waiting to happen. So I raised a bunch of money and built it up, and just poured a ton of pieces. And what had happened at Notre Dame, I had wooed 2 graduate students from San Francisco and from Los Angeles
to go to Notre Dame.
Go to Notre Dame.
Right.
They wanted to work with me, and they wanted to do casting. And one of them had already worked in a foundry. And so they came there, but by the time they got there, I had accepted the job.
Right.
And so unbeknownst to me, they applied to the graduate program here, and they got in. And so they literally drove across country with Charles and me and followed me there. And so the 2 of them, I paid all their living expenses for the next 6 months to get that show out.
Wow.
Because we were just working really hard and casting like mad.
And that show for your gallery?
That was for Sonia, and it was because it was bronze now. It's no longer paper. It's the same, similar forms, and they're a little more organic, but they were all bronze pieces. And in fact, when I went to the gallery, she had moved from Ontario. They tore down the building she and Van Stratton and Richard Gray were in on Ontario, the corner of Ontario, and built this huge high-rise store. But so they had all moved over to Superior then, which was called Suhu at that time, into those warehouses. And the walls that they put up were the aluminum studs, and then just the drywall over it. Well, you could hang paintings on those walls, but you can't hang sculpture on those walls. So I had to go out and buy plywood, 3/4-inch plywood, and surface the walls carefully so I wouldn't mess up her wall, and so that I could hang my art.
So you won't believe this, but you've gone through an hour
already.
And I know. Is that crazy? Now my understanding is you have to go somewhere, and you can't.
Right.
So I'm going to have you come back, and
okay,
because we have only made it through the very first part of your
We haven't even got to
career.
the good stuff in Tucson.
Give me, I know, right? So that, I guess we'll have to wait for the good stuff to come up in Tucson. It's hard to believe. And by the way, all those great art galleries you show, I feel very honored because I get to show your work too, both sculpture and painting. And, you know, at this point in time, you've retired now from the U of A. And you're making art. What would you tell an artist who goes through this same situation that you do? So they go through art, academia, and now they're back in art, and they're in the later part of the years.
Oh, they got to keep their focus.
Keep focus.
If they're a real artist, they're going to need it like a drug, in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I always used to say to my students, if you don't live it, eat it, think it, and dream it, you might as well not do it. And you've got to be focused. And if you're not working every day like a job,
mm-hmm.
you're not going to say anything important. You know, if then it is a hobby.
So eat it, drink it, and love it.
Right.
Moira Geoffrion. And I know you do it because I watched it.
Yeah.
I watched it close hand.
Anyway.
Well, thank you for coming.
Great.
And I'm going to have you back because I need part 2. You'll be the first part 2.
Okay.
Moira Geoffrion. Very good. Thank you, Moira. I
Great.
appreciate it.